Raider Nation, draft week is finally here at long last. We are reasonable amount of hours away from finding out who John Spytek, Pete Carroll, Mark Davis, and the Las Vegas Raiders will make the newest Raider at pick number 6, or perhaps a different selection, depending on what happens once we get there. There has been some talk about trades up and down, but we've got a lot on our plate here for you in this final pre-draft episode. Excited to be back here with you. Rhett Lewis, former Raider, former NFL scout, Bucky Brooks here with us as well. And Bucky, we talked a couple episodes ago about my NFL Network mock draft that had the Raiders potentially trading, right? Look, it's a scenario, food for thought. This one, I did a full 7-round mock draft. So all 7 rounds, including the 3 6th-round picks, we got them all in there for you, which is a little bit like Fantasyland. Like it's impossible to fill this thing out that way. But we did it. It's an exercise, and we're going to go through it. But man, it's draft week, and I feel like, this is why you lift all them weights, right? This is why you fill out those mock drafts. This is why you watch all that tape. This is why you fill out all those draft reports, right, Buck?
I mean, if anything, knowing you, I know this is a labor of love. I know you spend countless hours trying to make sure that you get every pick for the Raiders. And so I love the fact that you swapped places with John Spytek and took on the responsibility of bringing the
He gave me the reins.
Yeah, we're going to bring him back to prominence. So I love it.
That's it. That's what we're doing. I might have hated the mock draft as soon as I turned it in and wished I changed at least 75% of the picks, but we'll go through it and we'll see where it goes.
Let's do it.
All right. So you and I have gone back and forth on this a bunch. We've forecasted potential number 6 overall selections. We've talked a lot about the potential of Ashton Genty. We've talked about defensive linemen up front. But then you and I had the chance to talk to John, right, on our last episode, and just kind of reinforced, his belief in the big men up front, his belief in the physicality and the violence of this game and how it all starts at the line of scrimmage. And this is not a reactionary, Colton Miller wants a new contract and all of that. This is not about that. This is about building a foundation to me. And it's why I went with an offensive lineman at pick number 6 overall in Armand Membu from Missouri. Thinking that Will Campbell's off the board at 4 to the Patriots, this is kind of where I went, and not necessarily knowing, maybe Genty's already off the board at this point, Buck. But I decided to go Membu at 6 to the Raiders.
So what I love about this pick for the Raiders is it is an opportunity for Spytek and Pete Carroll to kind of reestablish the culture in that locker room. And if you're going to be a rough and rugged team, the way that you show it is, 1, invest in the offensive line, invest in the trenches. 2, make sure that the person that you have, that you're picking, can dominate in the trenches and has the nastiness that you want. When we look at tape, whether it's looking at the all 22 or looking at the highlights, the one thing that stands out when you look at Missouri's offense, Membu is dominating people at the point of attack.
On the right side now. And we think he can go to the left.
Yeah. And his athleticism, his movement skills, his ability to climb to the second level and dominate and blow people off the screen, exactly what you want. And when I just look at and think about the old Raiders, the classic Raiders, and knowing that Pete Carroll is a historian, he kind of fits the mentality, but more importantly, he fits the playing style that the Raiders have traditionally had at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah. And, it's just, again, you go back to the success that John has had evaluating that kind of talent up front, and being a part of that process in Tampa. Even go back to it, in Denver, what got the Broncos a Super Bowl and Super Bowl 50. And so it just made sense. It feels like a pick you're not going to lose with. You know what I mean? Like this is, if we talk about hitting doubles, this feels like a double when we're sliding into third for a triple, because the ceiling for Membu, I think you and I can both agree, feels a little bit higher than Will Campbell, even though Campbell might go first.
100%. And it's the ability to look at the board and assess what is available. And so we can talk about, for so long, we talked about Ashton Genty, the running back, being there. But we also have talked about this being a very deep and talented running back class. And so if you bypass the running back in the first round, you can get a comparable player in the second round, given how deep it is. And so, hey, go get an offensive tackle now. If you want to go back later to get the running back, this should be a running back that can come in and give you quality minutes and quality production.
And again, I reference, back to our conversation, with John in talking about that scenario he laid out there from when he was with the Cleveland Browns, and assessing the potential of, all right, do we take Joe Hayden, do we take Eric Berry, knowing that there's a safety we probably like in TJ Ward in the second round, like maybe it's a better value for us to take that corner in the first round because the drop off at corner is bigger into the second round than it is at safety. And I think about that, and I think there aren't a ton of elite offensive tackles in this draft. So, like, if you got a chance to get one in the top 10 and you don't have to, move up to do it, there you go. That's part of the reasoning. All right, let's move to the second round pick here. And again, I went back and just kind of studying the Raiders roster and, thinking about that running back spot, thought long and hard about one of the two Ohio State backs here, knowing the familiarity with Chip Kelly, knowing, just how good they were, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, but also understanding they might both be gone by that point. Like, it is a real possibility that at 37 overall, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins could both be gone. Travion might go in the first, depending on how things shake out. Quinshon could go, earlier in the second than the Raiders are up at 37, which is the fifth pick of the second round. And I felt like at this point, the sweet spot for hitting the final group of corners with kind of immediate impact starter ability was the way to go here. And I ended up going with Trey Amos, the cornerback from Ole Miss. Now, look, he is a long corner with some really sticky kind of man coverage skills. And, I know that we can, mix it up and what Patrick Graham wants to do and where Pete Carroll has been in his past. But I think that this dude can give the Raiders somebody they can count on one side of the field.
Love it. And I love it because we talk about just understanding what your coaches prefer to have in certain positions. And in Trey Amos, you talk about a long corner, a guy who really does his damage in press coverage, look, which is what Pete Carroll loves. He wants to disrupt the opponent at the line of scrimmage, wants to change the timing of the passing game. And Trey Amos certainly can disrupt that rhythm of wide receivers and quarterbacks, given the way that he can make them run off their spot. And the thing that I like about him is just his competitive feistiness that you see on tape.
Yeah.
Really good player, man. Just a solid pick. So at the top of the second round, which has been the sweet spot for cornerbacks traditionally in the past, number 37, you get a guy that is a starter right from day one.
Yeah, and look, I think, if you're not going running back here, I think you really got to consider receiver here at this point. And, gosh, look, if Emeka Buka is somehow available, right, I think you consider it. I think you would consider Luther Burden if he's available here. I don't know that that's going to be the case. I thought long and hard about Jaden Higgins right here from Iowa State. Big physical wideout that maybe doesn't, that skill set isn't quite present. That frame isn't quite present in that Raiders roster. But I instead chose to go with the corner again, thinking the value of Amos here at 2 is better than what we're going to find at 3. And maybe we can find a comparable receiver in the 3rd as opposed to the 2nd. Because again, this feels like a stronger receiver draft in the 2nd and 3rd than it did in the 1st. And so that's part of the thought process.
And then it's funny because at the beginning of the process, Trey Harris was one of those guys that was talked about as maybe a top 5 wide receiver in this class. Some things happened at the combine in terms of speed where guys have kind of jostled him and knocked him down. But make no mistake, this is a big play specialist. He was a weapon for Jackson Dart. When you look at the tape, you see him run past fast DBs over and over and over again. When I think about the Raiders and I think about getting a big body playmaker on the outside, I would like him to have the speed to get vertical. And when you go back and think about some of the wide receivers that Pete Carroll had at his disposal in Seattle, everyone thinks about the DK Metcalfs and those guys. But look, man, he has some other guys, Big Mike Williams and some others that played really well for him up in the Pacific Northwest.
Great point. And so, I did end up, this was not at all my intention to pick Treys from Ole Miss in back-to-back selections with Trey Amos and Trey Harris. I did choose Trey Harris in the 3rd round for the Raiders. I mean, the more you look at the receiver group, the more you're like, we got to find a dude here. We got to find a dude we can rely on, and we can call up. And so I would not, be shocked if they felt the receiver value is better in the 2nd and maybe wanted to chance Azarie Thomas being available top of the 3rd. Maybe a player like Darian Porter, wide receiver turned corner with really good traits, but pretty raw. Maybe that's, something you could consider there. But I think some combination of corner and receiver needs to happen pretty early, Buck.
Yeah, they have to figure that out because those are 2 big positions of need. They need starters in both of those areas, and any guys that can come in and immediately contribute. That may require taking a little older player, a more experienced player, because the
Yeah.
expectations that these guys, second and third round, they need to come in and win jobs right away.
Yeah. Okay, so that gets us through the second round. Pick number 37, Trey Amos, the corner out of Ole Miss, who some have mocked up there in the first round, at times. And I think again, if it's Maxwell Hairston, maybe it's Hairston. Is it Benjamin Morrison if he's there from Notre Dame? Again, those are names that are in that range there at pick 5. And then in the third round, with Trey Harris at receiver, I think there's other receiver names that you could be talking about there. Maybe Kyle Williams from Washington State is available, different type of body type. Maybe it's Alec Manor. Maybe Jack Besh is available in the
Mhm.
third, at the top of the third. Jalen Royals from Utah State. Again, just some other names to consider there in the second and third. Then I went in the fourth round, and this one I really thought twice about.
Did you?
I did.
Did you?
I did.
Okay.
I ended up going with this stud defensive tackle from Indiana. I don't know
Oh,
why. I don't know how that came up,
Brett,
Buck.
how did that come up? Like, Brett, where'd you go to school?
Um, yeah, I went to
Oh,
Indiana. Yeah,
oh, you're a Hoosier,
yeah,
so you know
yeah.
him really well.
I'm a Hoosier. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but here's the thing. Again, you want to continue to build up front, and without a defensive presence up front in the first 3 picks, I thought this might be an opportunity to get ahead of the curve with some of the last remaining top D tackles in this draft. And CJ, you saw at the East West Shrine Bowl, was dominant. He's an interior disruptor to me. And let's go through the prospect of CJ West here for just a second, and then we'll get to what I kind of wish I would have done in this selection instead. But
Mm.
to me, again, this is a dude who transformed a defensive line. Coming in the spring portal. So after spring ball, came in short order over the summer and in August, and helped Indiana become a college football playoff team. Again, most successful season in program history. He was a big catalyst for it on the interior. And in the scheme that Indiana runs allowed him some flexibility to wreak havoc in the backfield. It was
Mhm.
not like, hey, you got to be in this gap. You got to be here. No, they relied on the linebackers to fix stuff, and said, hey, if defensive front, like, you guys just go, man. Find a way to get in there and cause some havoc and create some disruption. And he did that to the best of his ability. And I think he could still. I think there's still a little bit in there that could come out from him. So I like CJ West, and I know you got a chance to see him there in Texas during the Shrine Bowl.
Yeah, really impressive. Like I give you a hard time about the alumni ties, but he was a pretty impressive prospect down there. And when you think about what he's able to do in terms of being scheme friendly, being
Yeah,
able to showcase some different things, he's a unique find. And when we're in the fourth round, we're talking about developmental players who have
yeah.
redeeming traits, qualities that can pop at the next level. He exhibits a few that certainly makes him a worthwhile option at this stage of the draft.
And look, you like the prospect of Christian Wilkins, right? Coming in there and again being able to play a full season. Didn't get that this past year after signing the big contract, but bring him in, and then let CJ West line up next to him. Let him rotate in there with Lecky Fotu and Adam Butler and Jonah Lalu. So like I think you still need to get better in there, and you still need to build you know that fortress of strength right upon that defensive front, knowing what it took to win a Super Bowl in the NFL last year, and the type of resources that were spent by the Eagles to go and do that. So again, just another thought. My second guessing here is the Raiders have done a ton of work on the quarterbacks, Buck.
Mm-hmm.
And John Spytek said as much, in his news conference ahead of the draft. He said, look, we did our work on the quarterbacks for a reason, right? They might consider taking one. I think this might be a spot for Quinn Ewers from Texas.
Ooh.
And I know there's been a lot of Will Howard talk out there, and obviously reuniting with Chip Kelly. Certainly get that. And maybe that's the pick somewhere, in the third, or maybe that's the pick here in the fourth round. But if you have your choice, to me, I'm going with a supreme arm talent. And I would give Quinn Ewers the edge there with his arm and just in what he would bring to the table, just from a natural ability standpoint.
Yeah, yours is really interesting. We've had conversations with him.
Yeah.
We like guys that have gone through some adversity and those things. He certainly persevered through some tough times. And at one point, man, people raved about his talent. When you watch him in Texas playing through those injuries, you see flashes and those things. But you're talking about a development guy, someone that you really want to work with. He appears
Yeah.
to have a good head on his shoulders and all those things. Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes sense.
Just a thought there. Okay, and then look, you're seeing this. You're saying, all right, we were talking about giving the Raiders a running back at 6 overall. Now we're getting to the 5th round. We don't have a running back yet. I get it. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
But Raheem Mostert did come over and has been very successful in this league when healthy. When healthy is a big if. Still have Sincere McCormick, Zamir White, Dylan Laube, brought in Isaiah Spiller as well. So like there's bodies there. And depending on the scheme which the Raiders want to hang their hat on and want to run some of that zone, it feels like maybe you can find you can find success with the group you have. Plus, in the 5th round, I got him adding from Kansas State, DJ Giddens, 4.43 40-yard dash at well over 200 pounds. I think he put that check mark in the athleticism column. Major production, 6.55 yards per carry, and he was scheme diverse, Bucky. Like they were about 20%, 20% zone scheme, 20% gap, 20% counter. Like they were all across the board at Kansas State, and it feels like he's not a one-trick pony. So however you want to utilize him, he thrived. You went to about 6. That is a school record, 6.55 yards per carry, and he rushed for well over 1,300 yards. So like that's production. There's some traits there. I kind of like the fit.
Yeah, there's some traits there. You talk about the speed and the
Yeah.
production, like that certainly helps, man. When you got that pop that he has at 4.43 in the 40, and then you think about the production that you talked about, 6 yards a
Yeah.
carry, you see him have big play after big play. You're throwing darts in that round, and you're looking for guys who have like these elite traits that hopefully you can build around and
Right.
develop. Gideon certainly, he put some on display.
Yeah. Yeah, I think again, just I think you're getting towards the end of the real value of the running back group there in that 4th, 5th round. I think a ton of guys are going to go in the 2nd and 3rd, and so to me, I think you get some pretty good value there, top of 5 with DJ Giddens. Certainly wouldn't be surprised if he's gone. At that point,
Mm-hmm.
if he's gone at the bottom of the 4th, as teams start to feel the urgency of finding one of these guys. 3 picks in the 6th round. I'll name all 3 here, and then we can just kind of discuss, like what those picks kind of represent and what that is kind of about. Pick number 4 in the 6th round, I went with Jalen Smith, corner out of USC. Just interesting story there. He was unavailable for USC during spring ball, so they kind of used that to evaluate where their biggest need was in the secondary. And Danton Lynn, who spent a ton of time in the NFL, was their D coordinator last year in his first season, was like, Jalen Smith can play any of these positions in the secondary. Let's find out where our biggest weakness is, and that's where we put Jalen. Turned out it was outside corner. That's where he lived for USC. It was somebody they could rely on. I then went with Jack Kaiser, who has played more games in a Fighting Irish uniform than any other player in Notre Dame program history. Like that's saying something now. Linebacker, major special teams ability. And then with the last pick in the 6th round, I went with Jackson Slater, a guy we saw at the Senior Bowl, Sacramento State. FCS All-American there, and a guy that maybe moves into center, provides some depth there, but can kick into one of the guard spots and give you some depth.
Yeah, really interesting 6th round class, because the guys that you talked about, one, first thing that stands out to me, high IQ guys, because if you
Yes.
can play multiple things, you've had to really understand the scheme, understand your role within it, and understand others around you. So when you think about Jalen Smith and Jack Kaiser, being able to do a lot and being part of what I call like big programs, they kind of understand what is needed to get themselves ready to go.
Yeah,
And then in Slater, you talk about a small school guy, but you got to dominate at that small school, and you see him do that. You talked
he
about
did.
being an experienced player, 4-year starter, and all of those. Uh, what you're trying to do is mitigate the risk when you're taking gambles, particularly late flyers. And
Yeah.
his experience will give him a chance to not only understand how to play well enough to extend that opportunity out, but eventually it's going to give him a chance to really crack the door open to eventually be a player if he shows well in camp and those things.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you're hoping for. But we talked about this earlier. When John Spytek mentioned the competition at guard, and like they feel pretty good about the guys that they have competing for those 2 spots, certainly. And look, and that's great. And you're building depth. With a player like this in the 6th round, and then maybe down the road this turns into a player that can compete for a spot when and if called upon. So like that, played a lot of football too. And I get it is at a lower level, but those guys have shown the ability to make that transition. And then lastly, 7th round, pick 6 of the 7th round, pick number 2 overall. I'm going to give you the floor. Efton Chisholm, wide receiver, Eastern Washington, massive production, maybe not the athleticism traits you like, but man, reliability when it comes to getting open and catching the ball. And getting another receiver here, bring more bodies in to compete, and that's what it's all about.
I got to say the exposure was he was a late ad. I think he showed up at the East West like late,
Yeah,
and you can just see him. And he caught my eye returning kicks. Right, everyone else is struggling. He's catching them effortlessly. Naturally, the first thing they do is the comparison to Cooper Cup, different body type and all that.
yeah,
This dude has the juice. He has the goods. He's quick. He's athletic. Great with the hands. He has some traits that you absolutely love. And seventh round pick, nothing to lose. You're trying to find
let's
someone
go.
that can make it happen in training camp and has a little chip on the shoulder. He has this, but he is a really quality player. And when I begin to think about how can he get a jersey on Sundays, I think about the return game. I think about being the fourth and fifth option at wide receiver, someone who's going to do all the dirty work. To me, there's a path for him to make a roster, and I'm excited about that. So a seventh round pick, I would be excited about that if I'm in the building.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to give you the opportunity here to close this thing down with an alternate pick at 6 overall. Let's say that
Mm,
Ashton Genty is off the board and
mm.
unavailable. Okay. All the top 3 guys have gone. Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter is gone. Mason Graham maybe still available.
Uh,
Armand Membu again.
yeah.
I've given you this one, but
Mhm.
outside of Membu, what would you consider here if you're John Spytek?
Blue chip player. And I think it's so hard. Like you have your love affair with your Hoosiers, I think Spytek would have a hard time bypassing
Oh,
Mason Graham at 6. And the
yeah,
reason why is not only what you see on tape, but being able to pick up the phone and call people back in Michigan and talk about, hey, who is he?
yeah,
What is he about? Is he about the same stuff that we're about? Does he love ball? How does he show it? Would he come in and be a thermostat type leader, change the energy and the culture in the program? I think Spytek would do that. And then I just have this vision of Pete Carroll meeting him in those rooms and the energy that Carroll brings about. And by the time they finish the meeting, they're darn near engaged in a chicken wing headlock
yeah,
face off because the excitement there. To me,
yeah.
he fits. He's a really good player. He's a cleaner prospect as you'll find in the draft class. And the prospect of putting him alongside Christian Wilkins with Max
That
Crosby,
that sounds pretty
we
good.
talk about playing hard. And some people
Yeah.
would say playing hard is a skill. He has that. That's why I'll be really, really excited about it.
I love that one. I really do. The more I think about it, the more I really like it, especially that visual. And like, can you imagine Mason Graham and Jackson Powers Johnson on a competition Wednesday for Pete Carroll? Like just kind of getting after it, that competition mindset. Like that dude brings it on every snap. And those interior dudes on the offensive front, like they're gonna feel Mason Graham. And
Uh,
they're gonna get tired of it too, if that's the case.
oh, they're gonna get tired of. They're gonna get tired of dealing with them.
But
They're
it's
gonna
gonna
get
bring
tired
out
of
the
being
best.
worn down. And
Yeah.
those things. It's just, it is one of those things that, man, when you bring in hard hat lunch pail
Yep.
players, it just changes the energy in the program. And I just think about, look, Max Crosby being the standard in that locker room and having to rubber stamp the guys that walk in there. I think he would absolutely rubber
Oh,
stamp Mason Graham as a guy that
oh.
he would want to play with.
Philosophical, cultural, emotional type of fit. Like just loves ball, eats ball, lives ball, breathes ball, and goes out there and does it every practice and every game. I love that one too. But the intrigue continues, the mystery continues until we get to draft night. Until then, we appreciate you being with us on this run of our Raiders NFL Draft podcast. We'll be back with you for one final episode post draft, wrapping up all the picks that have all been made. Be sure to check out our content on Raiders.com. That full 7-round mock will be out there. Bucky's got some great content coming out on Raiders.com as well, just to keep you occupied until we get to Green Bay on Thursday night. All right, bud. Everybody, have a great one. Bucky, it's always a pleasure, bud. We'll catch you up after the draft.